I never liked being alone in the house. It always felt too quiet, too empty. A chuckle in the dark. They say you should never be afraid of the dark. They lie. The dark is where fear thrives, where shadows dance, and where your worst nightmares come to life. It's a playground for the unknown, and the only laughter you'll hear is your own, echoing back as a nervous tremor. The silence of an empty home. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It was the kind of quiet that seemed to seep into your bones, making you acutely aware of every breath you took, every heartbeat that echoed in your chest. The walls, once filled with laughter and conversation, now stood as silent sentinels, bearing witness to the emptiness that had taken over. The kind of quiet that presses in on you, suffocating you with its emptiness. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, anything, to break the silence. The air was thick with a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something was just out of sight, lurking in the shadows. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind against the windows, sounded like a whispered threat, a reminder that I was utterly alone. Each creak of the floorboards, each sigh of the wind against the windows, sounded like a whispered threat. The house seemed to be alive with its own eerie symphony, a chorus of unsettling noises that played on my nerves. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and sending shivers down my spine. It was as if the house was trying to communicate, to tell me something I couldn't quite understand. The shadows danced on the walls, creating shapes that seemed to move and shift with a life of their own. I sat alone in the living room, the dim light from a single lamp doing little to pierce the oppressive darkness that clung to every corner. The room felt vast and empty, the silence amplifying the sense of isolation. I could almost hear the echoes of the past, the faint remnants of conversations and laughter that once filled the space. The memories seemed to hang in the air, just out of reach, like ghosts of a time long gone. The silence was not just an absence of sound, but a presence in itself, a heavy, suffocating blanket that wrapped around me, making it hard to breathe. The house, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt like a stranger, cold and unwelcoming. The silence was a constant reminder of what had been lost, a void that could never be filled. As I sat there, I couldn't help but wonder if the house would ever feel like home again, or if it would remain a silent, empty shell, forever haunted by the echoes of the past. Whispers in the walls. A floorboard creaked upstairs. My heart pounded in my chest. I strained to listen, every nerve ending on high alert. A soft whisper, barely audible, seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. My breath caught in my throat, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I was not alone. An unexpected presence. Panic welled up inside me, threatening to consume me. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional flicker of the dim light. Shadows danced on the walls, creating grotesque shapes that seemed to move with a life of their own. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back, a stark contrast to the heat of my fear. The darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating and oppressive, as if it were a living entity intent on swallowing me whole. I rose to my feet, my legs trembling. Each step felt like an eternity, my muscles stiff and uncooperative. The room seemed to stretch and warp, the walls closing in and then receding, a disorienting dance that left me feeling unsteady. I reached out, my hand brushing against the rough surface of the wall, seeking some semblance of stability. The texture was cold and unyielding, a stark reminder of the reality of my situation. My breath came in shallow gasps, each one a struggle against the rising tide of panic that threatened to overwhelm me. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. It was as if 1,000 tiny needles were pricking my skin, a physical manifestation of the fear that gripped me. Goosebumps spread across my arms, a shiver running down my spine. I could feel the presence, a malevolent force that seemed to watch my every move, its gaze heavy and oppressive. The air was thick with tension, each second stretching into an eternity as I stood frozen, caught between the urge to flee and the paralyzing grip of terror. A floorboard creaked again, closer this time. The sound was sharp and jarring, cutting through the silence like a knife. It was a reminder that I was not alone, that something was out there, moving closer with each passing moment. The creak was followed by another, and then another, a slow and deliberate progression that sent chills down my spine. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound, but the darkness seemed to swallow it, leaving me with only the echo of my own fear. Something was moving in the darkness, something sinister and unknown. The shadows seemed to shift and coalesce, forming shapes that were both familiar and alien. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but the darkness played tricks on my eyes, distorting reality and blurring the lines between what was real and what was imagined. The figure moved with a fluid grace, its movements almost hypnotic in their rhythm. It was a dance of shadows, a macabre ballet that left me feeling both mesmerized and terrified. My mind raced, desperate for an explanation, but there was only the chilling certainty that I was in danger. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape the oppressive darkness and the malevolent presence that lurked within it. But my legs felt like lead, my body frozen in place by the sheer weight of my fear. I could feel my pulse quickening, my heart hammering in my chest as I struggled to think clearly. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing in with a suffocating intensity. I knew I had to move, to do something, but the fear held me in its grip, a relentless force that refused to let go. The darkness seemed to whisper to me, its voice a low and insidious murmur that filled my mind with dread. I was trapped, caught in a nightmare from which there was no escape. Fear in the shadows. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, a fleeting glimpse of something tall and gaunt. I spun around, my heart pounding against my ribs. The shadow was gone, but the feeling of dread remained, heavy and suffocating. I was trapped in a nightmare, and the line between reality and terror blurred. Confronting terror. Fear can paralyze, but it can also sharpen the senses. Take a deep breath. Focus. Assess the situation. Is there a real threat, or is it your imagination playing tricks? In moments of terror, clarity of thought can be your greatest weapon. Finding an escape. My eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. The front door was too far. The window, maybe. I raced towards it, fumbling with the latch, my fingers slick with sweat. The window creaked open, and I scrambled through, the cool night air stinging my lungs. The aftermath. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the streetlights, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. The night was cold, and the chill seemed to seep into my bones, but I couldn't stop. I had to get away, far away from that place. The distant sounds of traffic were a comforting symphony compared to the unnerving silence I had left behind. Each car that passed by, each honk of a horn, was a reminder that I was back in the real world, away from the horrors that had chased me. The city, with all its noise and chaos, felt like a sanctuary. I turned back to look at the house, its dark windows like empty eyes staring back at me. It stood there, silent and foreboding, a stark contrast to the bustling city around it. The memories of what had happened inside were still fresh in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that those empty windows were watching me, judging me. Had it all been real, or a figment of my overactive imagination? The events of the night played over and over in my mind, each detail more vivid than the last. The shadows that moved on their own, the whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, the feeling of being watched. It all felt so real, but could it have been? I questioned my sanity, wondering if I had simply let my fears get the best of me. But deep down, I knew the truth. What I had experienced was real, and it had left a mark on me that I would never forget. The house, with its dark history and malevolent presence, had shown me a side of the world that I had never known existed. And now, as I stood under the streetlights, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What if it wasn't over? What if the horrors of that night were just the beginning? I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I had to be strong, had to face whatever came next. But as I looked back at the house one last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. The aftermath of that night would stay with me forever, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of the light. Trust your instincts. The human mind is a powerful tool, capable of conjuring both wonders and horrors. But sometimes, what we perceive as fear is simply our instincts screaming at us to pay attention. Don't ignore them. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. The lingering shadow. Even now, as I try to push the memory of that night to the back of my mind, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me from that house. A shadow that lingers at the edge of my vision, a whisper that chills me to the bone. The darkness, it seems, has a long memory.